They say blood is thick until it turns cold in a killer's hands. On July 11th, 2000, a father took a hammer and bludgeoned his wife and their 4 children to death, turning what seemed like a happy home into one of the most brutal family massacres in British history.
South Wales Police have 50 detectives working on this case and trying to establish some kind of motive for these killings. But at this stage, they say they're no clearer to the answer about why a man should want to kill his family in such a brutal fashion.
The most chilling part? These tragedies often come from the families you'd least suspect. The ones who smile the brightest in photos, who live in quiet neighborhoods and seem picture perfect to everyone around them. But as we've learned from countless tragedies, appearances lie. Behind the curtain of normalcy often lurks something deeply fractured. And after Robert murdered his wife, Catherine, 18-year-old James, 16-year-old Cian, 14-year-old Luke, and 10-year-old Bethan, he didn't panic. He didn't flee. Instead, he tidied up. He left a casual note for the milkman that morning, scribbling, "No milk until Friday," as if the world hadn't just ended inside his home. He took a mop and wiped blood splatter from behind Cian's bed, the same spot where he had brutally attacked her just hours earlier. He then carefully pulled duvets over the bodies of James, Luke, and Catherine, gently covering their heads, almost as if he was tucking them in for sleep. Was it guilt, regret, or some twisted attempt to add a layer of dignity to a slaughter? If he wanted dignity, many would argue he never should have done it in the first place. But the coldness of his actions didn't stop there. At 5:30 in the morning, he called the school bus driver to let them know that Bethan wouldn't be in school that day. Later that same afternoon, he picked up Catherine's phone and texted her best friend, Debbie, pretending to be his wife. He canceled their scheduled PTA meeting and wrote, "My mother is ill. Can we talk tomorrow?" A lie intended to buy time and avoid suspicion. Then, in a final unsettling gesture, he let the family's dog Brandy and their cat outside, sparing only the animals. Sometime later that day, or perhaps in the hours of darkness that followed, Robert made preparations to end his own life. He swallowed a toxic mix of slug pellets, weed killer, and paracetamol. He climbed into the attic, removed the hatch cover, tied a noose from electrical wiring, slipped a plastic bag over his head, and hanged himself. No self-harm note, no explanation, just silence. His plan worked so well that it wasn't until 11 days later, on July 23rd, that the family's decomposing bodies were finally discovered. So, who were the Mokris? To outsiders, they were just another middle-class family in Barry, a modest seaside town near Cardiff. The family lived at 43 Rutland Close in a quiet cul-de-sac. Their home was a large detached 5-bedroom house worth £250,000. Robert, 49, was a former civil servant who had transitioned into running a nightclub and later a small hotel. Catherine, 45, was deeply involved in her children's lives. She was the secretary of the local parent-teacher association and had just completed her degree in philosophy and sociology at Cardiff University, a remarkable feat for a mother of 4. Their lives were filled with the usual busyness, school runs, cooking, work, homework. They weren't perfect. They shouted at the kids sometimes, especially when the house was a mess or the music was too loud. But by all accounts, they were functioning. They shared household chores. Catherine handled most of the parenting and daily tasks, but Robert was present, at least on the surface. Their children were thriving in their own ways. James, the eldest, had just unknowingly completed his A-levels and secured a place at Bristol University to study law. He was also a talented guitarist and played in a band with his schoolmates. Cian, 16, had recently passed her GCSEs with good results. Luke, 14, was a passionate Manchester United fan and loved playing snooker. He had battled a brain tumor at the age of 8, an experience that left him with minor learning difficulties but never dimmed his spirit. And then there was Bethan, the youngest. Just 10 years old, she was autistic and required special needs education. Though a handful at times, she was adored by her family. Her favorite thing to do was walk their dog Brandy around the estate. By all appearances, the Massacre household was loud, lively, and full of love. They weren't saints, but they were trying, just like any other family. That's what makes this case so difficult to comprehend. But then again, that's the nature of long relationships, isn't it? When couples have been together for 5, 10, 15, even 20 years, 23 in Robert and Catherine's case, the spark tends to dim. Affection becomes routine. Passion takes a backseat to practicality. Life becomes a cycle of responsibilities, errands, bills, school events, and unfinished to-do lists. And for many, that's normal. That's love in its enduring, worn-in form. Robert and Catherine weren't any different in that regard. According to their friends, the two were always supportive of each other. In fact, Robert once told a close friend how incredibly proud he was when Catherine graduated as a mature student from Cardiff University. As mentioned earlier, she had just completed her degree in philosophy and sociology while raising 4 children and managing a household. It was no small feat, and Robert beamed with pride like any loving husband would. On the outside, this wasn't a broken couple. There were no screaming matches, no known abuse, just a family doing their best to get through life. In fact, when the police interviewed neighbors after the murders, they all echoed the same word: normal.
To start with, just couldn't believe it. Police officers broke into the house. I never suspected for a minute the outcome.
As you can see, the Massacre family didn't raise red flags. They were polite, private, and quiet. If anything, their family appeared to be more grounded than most. One of Catherine's closest friends, Debbie, spoke to investigators and the press in the aftermath. She said Catherine adored her children and loved her husband deeply, but when it came to Robert, she admitted there were small things, quiet things, subtle, easy to miss things. Debbie recalled that Robert had always seemed a little off. Not in a dangerous or threatening way, but emotionally distant, disconnected. She described him as a man in his own little world. Now, being in your own world isn't necessarily alarming. In fact, many people function that way. Some of us are thinkers. We internalize. We spend more time in our heads than in the moment. And Robert was said to be like that. He didn't lash out. He didn't vent or share. He kept everything inside. His thoughts, his fears, his failures. Debbie even noted that if Robert was battling mental health issues, he was very, very good at hiding them. That comment, that he was very good at hiding them, would later haunt many who knew him, because it implies something chilling, that maybe, just maybe, Robert Massacre had been unraveling for quite some time, quietly, invisibly, behind closed doors, in his own mind, where no one could reach him, where no one could stop what was coming. It's easy to look back in hindsight and search for signs, but there weren't any glaring ones, no violent outbursts, no therapy appointments, no diagnosed conditions. Just a man who smiled politely, did his job, watched football with his son, and occasionally told friends how proud he was of his wife. A man who was present, yet distant, stable, yet lost. Now, the discovery of the bodies came down to one person, Catherine's best friend, Debbie. Remember that odd, detached text message Robert had sent her, pretending to be Catherine to cancel their PTA meeting? That moment planted a seed of suspicion. Catherine hadn't answered any calls either, which was completely unlike her. Debbie's gut told her something was wrong. For the next 10 days, Debbie returned to the Massacre house over and over again. She knocked on the door, called out, waited, hoping someone, anyone, would answer. But there was only silence, and that silence didn't sit right with her. The Massacre home was never still. It was always alive with noise. Children shouting, dogs barking, music playing, but now it felt dead, like the life had been drained out of it. Debbie and Catherine were more than just friends. Their bond was sister-like. They spoke every single day. Their children were of similar ages and often played together. Debbie had even been the last person to see Catherine alive. On July 10th, just one day before the massacre, Robert had driven both women into Cardiff for Catherine's graduation party, a night she had long dreamed of. He even picked them up later from the Barry station. Debbie remembered laughing in the car that night with Robert cracking jokes. Before stepping out, she smiled and told him, "You are my angel." She had no idea that would be the last time she would ever speak to him. By mid-July, Debbie's worry had turned into quiet dread. Her kids mentioned they hadn't seen James lately. No one had heard from Cian. Something was clearly wrong. On July 23rd, she went back to the house one more time, but this time the details stood out. A strange, pungent smell, a swarm of flies, and the family car parked inside the garage, which was odd because the Massacre never used the garage. That was the moment her worry tipped into fear. She called a friend for help. Together they propped up a ladder and climbed to the upper floor. Through Luke's window, Debbie saw something lying on the bed, a still, odd shape. Her heart dropped. That's when she called the police. When officers finally forced their way in, they stepped into what looked like a normal home. At first, the downstairs was untouched, lived in, littered with teenage shoes by the door. James's guitar rested against the wall like he'd return any minute. But the illusion ended the moment they climbed the stairs. Upstairs, the heat and silence gave way to horror. The smell was overpowering. The bodies were already decomposing. Each of the children, James, Cian, Luke, and Bethan, was found in their own bedroom, lying face down in their beds, still dressed in their nightclothes. Catherine was found in the same position, on her usual side of the bed she once shared with her husband. It was as if time had frozen just before dawn. All had been killed with a heavy, blunt weapon, possibly a slate hammer, though it was never found. Each victim had suffered 2 to 3 blows to the head. A knife was discovered under James's bed, stained with the blood of his siblings, suggesting James may have been the last to die. And yet, none of them had fought back. There were no defensive wounds, no bruises on forearms, nothing to indicate a struggle. It wasn't a chaotic rampage. It was something far worse, calm, cold, calculated. Detective Inspector Paul Bethel, who led the investigation, said it best. It was methodical. "Picture the scene," he explained. "The house is silent, everyone's asleep, and Robert walks from room to room, striking his family as they sleep. Then he covers them with duvets." The detective paused. "Why cover them?" Theories vary. Some say it was shame. Robert couldn't bear to see their faces. Others believe he was trying, in a twisted way, to offer them some final dignity, as if tucking them in could undo what he'd done, as if hiding their eyes could erase his guilt. And then Robert took his own life. He was found hanging on the upstairs landing wearing a red t-shirt and trousers. In the aftermath of the massacre, people were left clinging to speculation, with no note, no recorded confession, and no one left to explain the why. Everyone, from neighbors to the national media, tried to fill the void. Was it financial collapse, emotional isolation, a fractured ego too proud to ask for help? The truth is, no one knows for sure, but certain detail, small, chilling breadcrumbs, began to form a clearer picture of what Robert Massacre might have been hiding beneath the calm exterior. One of the first hints was a mop. Found downstairs by investigators, it had been used to clean blood from a wall in one of the bedrooms, but it wasn't part of a cover-up. The scene hadn't been staged or tampered with. Police described the act not as concealment, but tidying. Neat, deliberate, pointless. He wasn't hiding what he did. He was straightening it up like a man who couldn't bear to leave a mess behind, even in murder. That detail stuck with investigators. It wasn't panic. It was precision. And that made it even more disturbing. Soon, an inquest began to unearth a string of deeply buried secrets, financial, personal, and emotional. On the surface, Robert was the image of success. A man in his late 40s living in a spacious 5-bedroom detached house in Barry, Wales. His children had all the modern comforts, televisions, CD players, the latest tech of the time. But underneath this middle-class image was a crumbling financial foundation. Robert's world was falling apart, quietly, privately, and quickly. Back in 1994, Robert had left his job in the civil service to pursue entrepreneurship. He bought a rundown hotel in Barry with several partners and transformed it into a nightclub called the Power Station. For a while, it worked. The club thrived off the weekend crowd coming in from Cardiff, and Robert enjoyed a taste of success. But like many quick rises, the fall came just as fast. By 1997, he sold the club and invested in a new venture, the Pembroke House Hotel, a 22-bedroom property in rural Haverfordwest. But the location was wrong, the business model flawed. Robert tried to replicate the success of his Barry nightclub in a sleepy countryside town. It didn't take off. Then came the final blow. In January of 1999, a kitchen fire shut the hotel down permanently, and when the insurance company refused to pay out, Robert was left with a dead investment and a mountain of debt. From June of 1999 until his death a year later, more than £126,000 disappeared from his business account. By the time of the killings, he had only £138 left to his name, and just over $600 in personal savings. The family was 2 months behind on their mortgage, and unpaid bills piled up like a ticking time bomb. In total, they owed more than £200,000. You can imagine the pressure, the phone calls, the letters, the threats from creditors. But perhaps more terrifying, Catherine, his wife, might not have even known. Debbie, her best friend, confirmed Catherine never spoke of money problems. And if she was unaware, it makes Robert's burden even more isolated. He was the provider, the man of the house, and in his eyes, he was failing. But it wasn't just about finances. The inquest also revealed an undercurrent of infidelity that had quietly tainted the marriage. Catherine had been involved in not one, but 2 brief affairs. The first, with David Osborne, a manager at one of Robert's hotels, ended in February of that year. The second, with a man named Paul Wyatt, was more recent. Catherine had met Paul at a pub and even exchanged a text with him the night before her death, just after midnight, suggesting they meet again. The message was subtle, uncertain, and hinted at something more. According to Osborne, these weren't grand love affairs, just fleeting escapes. Catherine, by all accounts, wasn't planning to leave her husband, but emotional betrayal, even without long-term intent, can fracture trust in a way that wounds deeply, especially for someone already crumbling under the weight of failure. What Robert may or may not have known about Catherine's affairs remains unclear, but his own secrets were arguably more revealing and more tragic. After the murders, a woman named Charmaine Jacobs contacted police. She was a worker from Cardiff and claimed she had been seeing Robert regularly. Every Tuesday or Thursday, he would drive his wife's car to Penarth Road, pick her up, and pay £50 for a short session. It wasn't just transactional. According to Charmaine, Robert liked to talk afterward. He would open up about his life, his kids, and his failing marriage. Charmaine described him as polite, clean, emotionally wounded, but not dangerous. She said he often mentioned that he and Catherine were no longer intimate. And the last time she saw him, the night of the murders, she remembered it vividly. It was raining hard. He seemed quieter than usual. Robert Mochri's double life was beginning to take shape. A man carrying the weight of financial ruin, a man whose pride had been punctured by infidelity, a man desperate enough to pay for connection but too ashamed to ask for help. He had lost the very pillars of identity that society tells men to hold: strength, control, and respect. Now, step back and consider this. The term for what Robert did is familicide. It refers to when a parent kills their entire family before taking their own life. It's rare, but not unheard of. In the United Kingdom alone, statistics show that nearly 3/4 of all female homicide victims are killed by someone they know, often a spouse or partner. And of the children killed in Britain each year, a shocking 75 to 80% are killed by their parents. The most common triggers: divorce, financial collapse, and male sexual jealousy. And this brings us to another painful layer. Robert's children, specifically Luke and Bethan, both had ongoing medical and developmental issues. Luke had survived a brain tumor. Bethan was autistic and attended a special needs school. It's not hard to imagine how Robert, already teetering, may have internalized their struggles as his own failures. Fathers often view their children's suffering as a reflection of their own inadequacies, and in the dark, warped mind of a filicidal parent, this becomes justification. If he believed he couldn't provide, if he believed the world was about to collapse around them, then, in his mind, the solution was to take them with him. It's not love. It's desperation disguised as love. A final, horrific attempt to control a future he was too terrified to face. We also now know that Robert had a history of mental health issues. In 1990, a full decade before the killings, he saw a psychiatrist while still working for the government. He reported suicidal thoughts, chronic fatigue, and low mood. He even said that going to work felt like someone had a gun to his head. This wasn't a man who just snapped. This was a man who had been quietly suffering for years, functioning but fading. And that's what makes this story so haunting. Robert didn't explode in rage. He imploded. He cleaned the blood. He covered his children. He sent a polite message to cancel a PTA meeting. He let the dog out. He moved with calmness, with calculation. He didn't act like a monster. He acted like a man who thought somehow he was solving something, but he wasn't. He destroyed everything, and what he left behind was not a resolution. It was a ruin. No amount of speculation can undo what was done. No justification, however emotionally complex, will ever make it right. And maybe that's the harshest truth of all. Robert saw failure, but what he gave his family wasn't escape. It was erasure. Now I want to hear from you. Was it Catherine's affair that pushed Robert over the edge? Or was he already unraveling, lost in a mind he couldn't control? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.